Welcome back for part 2 of America, 50 Years of Failure. I'm Randy Beardsley, and in part 1, we talked about a 50-year trend of poor leadership and poor results in our country. We talked about skyrocketing debt, a huge trade deficit, a loss of good-paying jobs, endless war, endless defense spending, and a failed environmental agenda. In part 2, we're going to talk about several other failed policies that are plaguing America and are essential for us to understand. But one thing I didn't talk about was the last slide that I presented in part 1. Here is that slide. At the bottom it reads, Progress Through Action. Now, although I did a lot of talking in part 1, and I'm going to do a lot of talking in part 2 also, I don't want to give the impression that this journey that we started on is only about talking about problems. There are a lot of people out there doing that already. The journey that we have embarked on is about action. It's about creating progress through the actions of people in our country that care enough about our country and are brave enough to be willing to do more than just talk about it. So let's jump into part 2. Let's start with welfare. In 1960, we spent $7 billion on welfare. Last year, we spent over $1 trillion on welfare. Quick math, that's a 15,614% increase in spending. The real question is, why did we spend over 15,000% more? Two fundamental groups receive these payments. Americans at work, but whose job doesn't provide adequate pay or benefits to support a family. And second, Americans that don't work due to lack of opportunity, lack of interest, or disability. I make this point because welfare is often stigmatized as simply a cash program for lazy people that don't want to work. And while there are some of those people in the program, a lot of the $1 trillion of welfare spending goes to working Americans that need help to get by. This is due to the result of the implementation of several failed policies that are destroying opportunities for Americans. In part 1, we learned that we betrayed millions of workers who had good paying jobs and good benefit jobs by shipping their jobs overseas. We replaced these jobs with service sector jobs that generally don't provide benefits or adequate pay to support a family. Later in this part, we will also discuss how poorly planned immigration and worker disability programs also played a role in turning America into a welfare state. The problem is, the number of Americans who need this help keeps going up, but the percentage of Americans who pay taxes to fund these programs, they keep going down. And when there aren't enough taxes to pay for this welfare, our government just adds more debt to pay for them. The war on poverty started almost 60 years ago, but looking at this graph, like so many other wars and policies that our government has managed, it's gone badly. Now, some will try to explain it away, saying we haven't accounted for inflation. So this graph shows welfare spending using inflation-adjusted 2016 dollars. And as you can see, even with inflation excluded, it just keeps going up. It appears that the more that we spend, the more we have to spend. Spending more money isn't fixing the problem, and it won't. Because if the underlying reasons keep getting worse, this endless increase in spending and debt will continue until our country collapses under the weight of diminished opportunity and devastating debt. Take a look at this graph. It shows the percent of inflation-adjusted welfare in yellow since 1960. It also shows our population increase in blue. This means that welfare spending has increased 25 times faster than our population has increased. This should be a red flag for anybody that's concerned about the future of our country. This ever-increasing spending demonstrates that the plan that our politicians have constructed for our country is just a failure. Welfare spending since 1960 as a percentage of GDP or total government spending has both increased about 300%. Think about this. Total federal payroll taxes are only about $1.7 trillion, and almost half of this just goes to welfare, with the remainder of the welfare funding coming from your state taxes to get to the $1.1 trillion. While it's difficult to get a good grasp on all the spending through the years, a good estimate is that for every dollar in payroll taxes that working Americans paid in 1960, which was about 12 cents, today 50 cents of every dollar you pay in taxes goes to welfare. This is an unbelievable statistic that no sane person would agree to go along with. Here's another unbelievable statistic. 1 out of every 4 people you will see today face opportunity that's so poor that they will get their health care from the Medicaid program that's paid for by, of course, those lucky enough Americans that still hold the remaining jobs that make enough money to pay taxes. 80 million people in our country have no means for health care, and their health care is paid for by the U.S. taxpayer. Also, 1 out of every 8 Americans don't even have enough money to pay to feed themselves or their families. They receive food stamps. That's 40 million Americans that will starve to death if we don't go to work to pay to feed them and their families. Now take a look at this graph. It shows an obvious correlation for every American except possibly our elected officials. Reckless welfare spending drives dangerous and reckless debt levels. Welfare spending is in yellow, debt is in blue, and they just both keep going up. Even though Americans pay 4 times more of their taxes to welfare, not only has our government not recognized the failure of these policies, that they've created the unprecedented need for this program, rather, we're being told that the solution is just we haven't spent enough yet. There is no end in sight for this American Last policy because there's no plan to correct the underlying reasons for the lack of opportunity and failure in the first place. Without solutions to the underlying problems, I anticipate this number is even going to go higher and continue to go higher after that. I'm not blaming these people that are getting welfare. You shouldn't either. Many of them people are victims caught in our failed system. This is an unsustainable condition where millions of Americans' survival depends on government aid supported by either the ever-dwindling number of Americans that pay taxes or the reliance on continuing levels of increasing debt. This is an unsustainable condition. Now, in spite of not having enough good-paying jobs and good benefit jobs for our citizens, our government decided that flooding our country with legal immigrants, illegal immigrants, and refugees from the world over would still be a good idea, even though it doesn't make any sense to bring more people into your country when the citizens that are here already don't have enough opportunity for themselves. Regardless, our government believes this is still a good idea. Take a look at the graph. It starts in 1960. 5.8% of our country were foreign born. Now it's almost 15%. It's triple the amount. That only includes up to 2015. Who knows what the number is today? That means that even up to 2015, there were 37 million extra foreign people that were born in a foreign country in our country. You heard that right, 37 million. There's likely over 45 million here now, since millions more, most of them illegally crossing, have arrived since 2015. This large influx of people's lowered wages and benefits, displaced Americans already here for some jobs, sent those Americans to the welfare rolls or disability rolls, and for those immigrants and refugees that faced the same lack of opportunity that existing Americans faced, they were just simply added to the already high welfare rolls. Aside from the detrimental effects just mentioned, this doesn't even consider the pain, suffering, and death that Americans endure every day due to the drug traffic, crime, human smuggling, and now COVID infections that come with this breakdown of the security of our border. Our government is forever taking our hard-earned tax money and our troops, sending them off to other countries so they can protect their border, but they won't protect our own. And don't believe the failed logic that America needs these workers. We have millions of potential workers in our country that just aren't working. Worse, not only are they not working, they're consuming the resources provided by working Americans through various forms of welfare. Some don't work because they're just happy to receive welfare. Others we will discuss below are receiving disability instead of working. We have a lot of people in jail, and others have just given up on working. They're probably living in their parents' basement. How can that be? Don't all these people need money to survive? Of course they do. But that's where you, the taxpayer, come in. You give over 50 cents of every tax dollar you pay in taxes to provide for them. Now here is a comparison showing the foreign-born citizen increase with our welfare spending. And once again, you see immigrants go up, debt goes up. There's no surprise here. When you bring in a high influx of a lot of low-skilled workers, people outpace good jobs, wages and benefits will be driven down. More will seek welfare benefits to get by. Those that come here and don't get a good job, they're also going to seek welfare benefits. This high correlation makes sense. Now might be a good time to try something different. Now, this mismanagement of our precious right of citizenship has been another key failure for our country. Our immigration and refugee policy makes absolutely no sense for America and Americans. So why is our government letting this happen and refusing to fulfill their constitutional responsibility to protect America, even though we're living through the awful consequences of this failed policy? It's a great question. Now, the failed policies don't end here, though. With good jobs shrinking and welfare sinking the U.S. budget with debt, there was an account that was flush with cash within the federal government. Anybody know what that was? Social Security Trust Fund. The Social Security Trust Fund is made up of Social Security contributions by taxpayers in excess of payouts over the previous years. With a shorter life expectancies and higher percentage of working Americans in years past, the Social Security Trust Fund, it was flush with $1 trillion surplus. It almost seems that a plan was hatched to get access to this money, which was meant for our retirees, and to use this money to mask the lack of opportunity for Americans, left behind by years of failed policies. The plan, rather than face the consequences of high unemployment rates, just pay people that should be working disability benefits from the Social Security Trust Fund that was meant for our retirees. Now, there was always a disability component to Social Security, but it was small. Let's take a look at what happened over the last 60 years to the working age disability component of our Social Security Trust Fund. As you can see on this graph in blue, it's a percent increase in working age disability people, and in yellow, the percent increase in population. And there's a huge difference, once again, between the two. Even though our population has grown quite a bit by 77% since 1960, working age Social Security disability recipients, they've climbed by 1,700%. That's what I said, 1,700% increase in working age Americans aged 18 to 64, while the population was only 77%. This graph just shows more clearly the incredible difference between our population rate increase and our disproportionate increase in disabled people in our country. It shows that Social Security and disability grew at 22 times faster than our increase in the population as a whole. With all this retirement money now going to over 8 million Americans as disability payments, we have destroyed the Social Security Trust Fund. Now it's expected to be depleted, out of money in 2036. This is bad news for those of us that have worked our whole lives expecting to receive Social Security benefits that we paid for. So bad now that the government talks of cutting Social Security benefits to people who have worked their whole life for these benefits, since they seem to have depleted this account with another welfare type scheme to cover up more failed policies of our leaders. Now ask yourself this: do you really think that the number of disabled people increased over 2,000% rate faster than the American population grew during this time? I don't know for sure, but I'd sure like to find out. This program needs a serious examination of how millions of people were added to these rules recently. If these are valid cases, then we need a full court examination of the root causes that have disabled so many able-bodied Americans during a time when manual labor jobs are in decline. If many of these people aren't really disabled, we need to fix the system and get them back to work. But even after moving 8 million working age Americans from holding jobs to disability benefits, jobs and opportunities are still scarce in our country. Why not come up with another bad idea? Why not also expand the ranks of the Supplemental Security Income Disability Program? Now, some of you probably didn't even know that we have multiple disability programs in our country, but we do. The Supplemental Security Income Disability Program, it's another disability program for those that have not even worked long enough to meet the very low criteria of Social Security disability, which is only having worked roughly 5 years in your whole life. So this is disability fundamentally for people that have never even held a job in their life or barely worked in their life. Now, like all these programs, there are legitimate people in this program. Take, for example, if you're severely autistic, that comes to mind. So some people do belong in this group. The question is that what changed in the last 50 years in our country that's continued to create such a dramatic rise in disability? Now take a look at this graph here. It shows the percent increase in the disability versus the percent increase in yellow in the population. And you can see once again, huge increase in the amount of people that are disabled to the population. I mean, once again, you see a dramatic increase in the SSI disability recipients compared to the population increase since 74. 74 is when the federal government took over this program from the states. Well, the U.S. population grew 53% since 1974. SSI disability recipients climbed by 205%. Now, this is way better than the 22 times greater from Social Security disability, but it's still almost 4 times the rate of the population growth. Now there's over 4.7 million disabled Americans in this program. Some people get benefits from both. Imagine this. There are 12 million working age Americans on disability right now. Yes, that's more people than working in all the manufacturing jobs in our country. It's almost twice as many disabled Americans getting benefits as there are private sector union workers in our country. If you work and pay taxes, you should have a lot of questions about this. Like the above program, this fantastic increase in disability cases just seems hard to believe. I'm confident that there are some valid cases in these numbers, but I'm also confident that there are millions of Americans with the same or similar health problems that get up and go to work every day. This program, like the above Social Security disability program, needs a serious evaluation, but it hasn't happened in 50 years. Don't expect it to unless Americans demand it, unless we demand it. Now, in spite of all the obvious failures of these government policies and the disastrous consequences they're having on our country, our government, they've doubled down on these failed policies. More immigration, more disability, more foreign goods, more losses of good paying jobs and good benefit jobs, more debt, more wars, more welfare, in spite of the overwhelming evidence of the failure of these policies. Now, these sound a lot like the results of a corrupt third world country, but sadly it isn't. It's our country. It's America. For 50 years, our government has implemented a plan of failure for our country. Bad outcomes due to bad policies, somehow continually implemented year after year by competent elected officials. These policies are bad for all Americans. But don't be deceived, because it doesn't matter if you're a white American or a black American or a brown American or any American. These policies are bad for Americans. But it seems our government, they're not interested in fixing these problems and is either oblivious to the hardship and suffering that these failed policies are inflicting upon us, or they just don't care. It seems to me like they hope to create enough distractions and diversions that we won't notice these failures. And up to this point, they've done a pretty good job. They distract us and they divide us by race, by color, by creed, by sex, orientation, political party, vaccine status, now whatever, it doesn't matter. They seem to be good at that also. We've all fallen for the divide and blame game at some point in our lives, myself included. Maybe you still believe that fighting among ourselves and continuing that path is the right answer. I hope not, though. Because as long as they keep us fighting among ourselves, blaming the other person, then we're missing the big picture of how they are failing our country. And for those of you still hung up on political parties, Democrats or Republicans, liberal or conservative, take a closer look at the graphs that we just looked at. It doesn't matter what party is in power. The result is the same. Americans lose. It's time to elect Americans that have an allegiance to America, not to a political party. Time to put manufactured grievances among Americans aside and instead focus on our common goals and beliefs to make our country better for ourselves and our families. We're all unhappy with the direction of our country. Yet we've all allowed people to sow hate and division in our country. And if they can continue to succeed in keeping us distracted and divided, they will continue to lead our country down this path of ruin. We can't let them continue to divide us when we have to be working together to solve these problems. When I really took an objective look at the condition of our country, I realized that most Americans didn't understand the dangerous path that our country was on. This is why I put together this 50 years of failure presentation. I also realized that we lacked a vision of what we wanted America to look like. It became apparent to me that we needed a comprehensive plan, a clearer strategy to define what's wrong with our country and what we believe are the right principles and goals for our country. Now, the outcome of that effort, that's the Beardsley Doctrine. The Beardsley Doctrine is a 20-article summary of critical things that I believe we must correct in our country if we are to reverse the failed path that we're currently on. Hey, I know it's not perfect, but it's a start, and I'm certain it's a big improvement over the present plan that has created the failed outcomes that we have discussed. Contrary to what you've been told, there is another way than the failed path that we're on. And the next time we meet, we're going to discuss the doctrine in more detail. And in our subsequent discussions, we're going to discuss each individual article, find out why each one is so important to our future. We're also going to begin to discuss what we all have to be doing to reject these failed policies, the hate, the division of our country. Our real focus is on developing an action plan that we can implement together to make a difference in the outcome. There's a lot more we all can be doing. We don't have to break the law, quit our jobs, riot in the streets, burn down our cities to do it. You'll be amazed when we get to those segments how easy it is for you to contribute to the change that our country needs. But first, we need to define what is important to us and prioritize our goals. Next time we meet, we'll start to discuss how we're going to reverse the death spiral that our country is on. I need your help, though, because most Americans like yourself, before you watch these videos, they don't fully understand the dangers of our current path because it's been well hidden from the American people. I need to reach these people. People like us that once knowledgeable, they're going to want to help us to make a difference. For too long, my silence and inactivity, your silence and inactivity, it's been construed as approval for these destructive policies that are stealing our children's future. But the time for silence and inactivity, it's past. Help me reach the silent majority by passing this on. Now, I could probably put together parts 3 through 100 when it comes to discussing the failed policies of our country. But I'm hopeful I made a strong enough case already. I hope that I've convinced you that our country needs significant change. And it won't happen unless we work together to make it happen. Let's move on to the next step where we define what's important to us and what goals we want to accomplish. When we meet next, we're going to take a look at the doctrine. This is when we start to move from the talking phase into the action phase. I'm looking forward to seeing you next time.